Hello and welcome to today's consultation hour. I'm very happy that you are here with us today. Today we will focus on contract articles and annexes, taking a closer look at some of the key elements of your grant agreement. And we will cover a range of topics, issues we are frequently asked about here at EUKI, provisions that are particularly important, and a few points that are sometimes overlooked in practice by the recipients. Each slide that will come up will include the contract clause I'm referring to. I know this is very text heavy and it's not ideal. I'm sorry about that, but when discussing contractual matters, that's somehow unavoidable. So please treat the slides mainly as a reference. I'll walk you through the main points of each clause, so it's more helpful to listen than to read along. And with that, let's get started. So we start with the so-called 20% rule. This is a very useful and pretty commonly used rule that will give you some flexibility to move funds around between budget categories. So budget categories are those headlines in your budget that are called external services, staff, transportation and travel cost, and so on. The important thing to remember is that you can only shift funds if you balance it out somewhere else in your budget. So if one category goes up, one or more other categories have to go down by the same amount. Also, the 20% rule only applies to direct costs. That means it does not cover administration costs or forwarding of funds. Your project partners can use the same flexibility within their own budget, but shifting funds between the partners is not allowed. Before you make any changes, especially when it comes to staff costs, it's a really good idea to check in with your EUKI financial advisor just to be on the safe side. And finally, don't forget that any budget shifts need to be reflected in your financial report. And with that in mind, let's move on to own contributions and inventory. Let me walk you through some key points about own contributions. On the cover note of your financial report, which you can see an excerpt of here, you always need to indicate the own funds that were used during the reporting period. Also, make sure you properly document your own contributions in your bookkeeping as project earnings, just like you would with your EUKI funds. This is really important because it ensures you can provide proof of using your own funds if asked, this is especially crucial in case of an audit. Another thing to keep in mind is Article 1.5 of the contract. It's mentioned here in that red circle. And it says that if your own contributions are lower than what is stated in the contract, GIZ has the right to reduce its grant by the same proportion. So this is something where you can really lose funds if you don't put attention. So keep that in mind. And don't forget, you also need to submit an inventory list with your financial report for any items purchased during the reporting period that have a value of over 800 euro. Let's continue with security retention. Let me briefly explain how the payment and security retention work under this contract. From the total grant, an amount of 10% will be retained as security, and that happens towards the end of the project. So in practice, GIZ will first deduct the agreed security retention from the total payments. This means that you will initially need to cover these costs yourself, and once all the obligations have been fulfilled, the retained amount will be released in line with the confirmed actual costs. Next, let's talk about exchange rates. If you are in a country where the local currency is not the euro, you will need to use the exchange rate from your bank voucher on the day the funds were transferred. You can only use the Info Euro converter in exceptional cases and only if you've received prior approval from GIZ. Another thing that is important to remember is that once you've used an exchange rate for a transfer, you need to stick with the same rate until all the funds from the transfer have been fully spent, even if the daily exchange rate changes over the time. Next up is due diligence of the partners. This point is about the work with the implementing partners, who are referred to as third-party recipients in the contract. As you've all been informed, it's really important to do proper due diligence on the partners you've chosen. This is actually part of the contract, as you can see here in Article 5.3. And just to flag this early on, we or the auditor may take a look at the due diligence you've done. So please make sure that you have all the relevant documentation on hand. I am assuming all of you have consortium agreements in place with your partners. According to Article 5.2, it's your responsibility to ensure that all the key conditions from your grant agreement with us are passed on to your partners. This includes essential points like reporting requirements, procurement rules, or documentation standards. So please take a moment and double check this so that all the aspects are clearly and explicitly covered in your agreements with your partners. Next up is responsibility as a main recipient. As the sole contracting party with GIZ, you as a main recipient are ultimately responsible for making sure that the project is being implemented properly by all partners. This means you should always review their financial reports before sending anything to us. It also means that we will request vouchers directly from you as a main recipient, even when those costs come from your partner's budget. So it's really important to stay in close contact with your partners and make sure you receive all the necessary documents in a good time. Next, let's move on to procurement. I am sure you're all familiar with this article, but it's so important that I want to emphasize it again. Please make sure you fully comply with GIZ procurement guidelines in Annex 4A. This is really critical because if there are any non-compliances with our procurement rules during an audit, it could lead to major findings or ineligible costs. And still until today, these are the main findings in all the audits that we carry out. And speaking of an audit, just as a reminder, you could be selected for an audit at any time. And this clause is pretty straightforward. You need to keep all your documents related to your project for 10 years after submitting your final financial report. This one is a quick point as well. If there are any major changes in your project's risk assessment or any significant financial or technical changes, please let us know as soon as possible. That way we can discuss the next steps together and agree on how to move forward. The last thing I'd like to touch on is the annexes to the contract. At the end of your contract, you will see a list of all the annexes. These are an essential part of your grant agreement. Besides the budget and the project proposal that you submitted, these are Annexes 1 and 2 of the contract. We really recommend to take the time to go and read through all the other annexes if you haven't done so already. You can all access them through the link that is mentioned in the contract. This link will take you to our GIZ website, and you can see an excerpt from this website here. Make sure to select the drop-down menu that matches your contract start date so you can easily find all the relevant documents and templates. When looking for answers on financial implementation, you first should stop here at Annex 3A, Financial Requirements. This document includes a lot of helpful information as well as a more detailed explanation on certain contract provisions. Please keep in mind that GIZ is currently going through a major transition of its SAP system, and this comes with a number of changes. And as a result, Annex 3A will be updated soon. Here at EUKI, we'll keep you informed by email about the most important updates, especially when it comes to fund disbursements and financial reporting. One more important point, the templates for disbursement requests, including the schedule of funding requirements, as well as a template for the financial report, have recently been updated. This is particularly relevant for those of you who have been working with EUKI for some time. Please make sure to use the new templates and don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions.